The war didn't start with a declaration. It started with a scream. For decades, humanity believed the galaxy was indifferent, neither friend nor foe. We had met others, traders, scholars, explorers. But behind the veil of peaceful diplomacy, a shadow was growing, an empire that did not trade, did not negotiate, did not coexist. They were called the Vanduul Expanse, a collective of war-hive species who viewed all others not as nations, not as equals, but as resources. Biomass, labor, fuel, flesh. Their fleets emerged from deep voids in the galaxy without warning. Their ships were monstrous, black biometal, bristling with spines, tentacles of machinery and pulsating cores. They looked grown, not built. And their weapons were designed not just to kill, but to break. It began with Proxima Prime, a beacon of human achievement, a megacity planet with 8 billion souls, towering arcologies and orbital elevators that glittered like threads against the stars. The Vanduul didn't fire orbital bombardments. They deployed flesh-shear clouds, swarms of nanoblades that shredded structures, skin and bone alike. Entire city blocks dissolved into red mist. Resistance was instantaneous and futile. Human. Defense fleets rushed in, carriers, dreadnoughts, planetary shields. But nothing could prepare them for disruption spines, weapons that bent gravity around ships, folding their hulls inwards, snapping steel and bone like twigs. Within 48 hours, Proxima Prime was silent. The orbital elevator's tether hung limp, frayed at the edges, drifting toward the planet like a falling serpent. 8 billion voices, gone. The galaxy thought that would be the end of humanity. But it was only the beginning. The crushing wave of Vanduul didn't stop. Triton, Europa, Kepler-6 2F, Vega Station, New Dawn, one by one. Colonies burned. One by one, planetary shields cracked under pressure waves. Refugee fleets scattered. Some made it back to Earth. Many didn't. Humanity tried everything. Quantum torpedoes, gravlances, singularity warheads. But the enemy adapted. Their living ships regenerated, grew armor mid-battle, and reshaped their weapons like biological nightmares. On the ground, it was worse. Neuroleech spores infected soldiers. Once paralyzed, they were dragged into black flesh pits where screams echoed for days as Vanduul harvesters turned flesh into fuel, bone into structure. The enemy didn't just conquer. They made you watch while they turned your cities into factories, your people into parts. Earth's last stand, the final wave came for Sol. No more colonies, no more outer defenses. Just Earth, Mars, and Luna standing alone. Humanity's fleets were shattered remnants. Refugee ships became warships, bolted together in desperation. Civilian haulers armed with scavenged railguns. Mining drones converted into torpedo platforms. It was not enough. The battle above Earth lasted days. Terran dreadnoughts were ripped in half by Vanduul tendril ships. Cities on Mars burned visible from Earth's surface. Luna's defense grid exploded in a blossom of white fire, but even as ships shattered, humans fought. As buildings collapsed, civilians, not soldiers, civilians, manned A turrets, fired homemade railguns, launched drone swarms hacked together. With duct tape and desperation, when the orbital bombardments finally rained down, cities fell, but bunkers beneath the Earth stood. Beneath every crater, every collapsed arcology, humanity dug in. The Vanduul descended to mop up the last survivors. And that's when they made their final mistake. The break. They captured us. Thousands, tens of thousands. Dragged from bunkers, shackled, collared, bodies broken. Bones shattered, arms twisted from sockets. Soldiers stripped of exoframes. Civilians branded. They loaded us into flesh holes, living prisons. Our bodies were broken, but they forgot. Something. It wasn't our bodies they needed to fear. It was our will. In the cages of the Vanduul, surrounded by death and despair, a spark ignited. A whisper became a chant. A chant became a roar. You broke our bodies. But you'll never break humanity. The Vanduul had perfected the art of breaking species. Across the galaxy, their prisons were filled with the hollow-eyed remnants of hundreds of civilizations, broken, silent, compliant, But humanity was different. The Vanduul's prison. Ships were nightmares, biomechanical caverns of pulsing flesh walls, arteries the size of tunnels, and machinery grown into bone and sinew. Prisoners were fused into the infrastructure, their pain fueling the engines, their minds dulled by neural dampeners designed to erase rebellion. Except, it didn't work on us. Inside one of these monstrous ships, designation, Crucible. Of silence, thousands of human prisoners were embedded into biocages. Their limbs shattered, nerves frayed, eyes blindfolded with living tissue. Most species would have succumbed, let their minds go quiet to avoid the agony, but not humanity. Not the species that endured millennia of war, famine, extinction events, and their own brutality, and yet still rose. The whisper war begins. It started small. A single rhythmic tap against a bone strut. The faintest signal, a code from an ancient era, Morse code. Tap tap dot dot tap dash tap dash tap dash tap. Alive. Nearby prisoners picked it up. Despite their broken bodies, their hands barely functional, they tapped back. Morse became drumbeats against the cage walls. Drumbeats became sequences. Sequences became plans. The Vanduul didn't notice. They thought it was meaningless spasms, the death throes of fragile bodies. They were wrong. Prisoners. Analyzed their surroundings. The ship's biomechanical structure grew and repaired itself constantly, but it needed nutrients, blood, bone, flesh. That meant systems vulnerable to corruption. Doctors, engineers, scientists, soldiers, civilians, every human trapped there had knowledge, memory, ingenuity, even with broken hands and shattered legs. Humans found ways to fight. They learned to infect the ship's biosystems, smearing bacterial cultures into neural nodes, introducing metal scraps from broken shackles into the organism's circulatory flows, triggering rejection responses, sabotaging power conduits by forcing their own blood into energy veins, causing feedback loops. A teenager, Lena Cade, 16 years old, discovered that biting into a certain nerve stem caused cascading nerve failures in one wing of the ship. Her act alone blacked out 200 cells. An old maintenance worker, Jinsu Park, 63, used a sharpened bone fragment to sever a lymph relay feeding the prison's main inhibitor systems. The Vanduul began noticing. Lights flickered, hull sections convulsed. Doors locked shut or refused to open. Entire processing segments collapsed as the ship's biomechanical system spasmed in revolt. They called it the rot. The prisoners didn't act as individuals, they acted as a single organism. One man learned the pulse rhythm of the ship's arterial systems. A woman memorized the growth cycles of its bone repair scaffolds. A child charted the fluctuations of bioelectric patterns by the frequency of shocks delivered to their cage. Piece by piece, they mapped it, owned it, turned it against its masters. When one prisoner was caught sabotaging a growth node, they were executed, but not before transmitting the flaw in the system to everyone else through the rhythmic code tapped against their cages. Every death taught the others. Every failure became a weapon. 38 days after capture, the first full sector of the ship went dark. No lights. No restraints, no surveillance. The bioflesh walls began to sag, deflate, starving. That's when the prisoners broke free. With broken hands, with shattered legs, with ribs stabbed through their own sides, they rose. They didn't have guns. They didn't have armor. They had sharpened bone, metal shards, claws made from ripped Vanduul limbs. They came out screaming, not in rage, in defiance. You broke our bodies, but you'll never break humanity. Vanduul jailers were overwhelmed. They were biological weapons themselves, taller, stronger, designed for combat. But they didn't expect prey that used the environment itself as a weapon. Flesh walls ripped apart to flood chambers with acid sacs. Membrane floors sliced open to expose pulsing nerve clusters. Prisoners jabbed metal into them, sending shockwaves that crippled whole decks. Organ pipes exploded as humans ruptured bile tanks, sending caustic fluids into Vanduul control pits. It wasn't a prison break. It was a reversal. The captors became prey. By the end of the 49th day, The Crucible of Silence was no longer a Vanduul warship. It was a Terran flagship, a floating tomb of its former masters, and a beacon to every other ship in the fleet. The humans wired its transmission array to pulse a message in every known galactic language. You broke our bodies, but you'll never break humanity. That message played on loop as the ship, now fully under Terran control, aimed itself at the nearest Vanduul battleship and rammed it at 0.93 C, turning both into a new star in the void. But this was only the beginning. Across the fleet, on every prison ship, every labor barge, every corpse factory, humans were rising. The prisoners' revolt spread like wildfire. On other ships, other humans had heard the transmission. And even species previously broken by the Vanduul, the Azekra, the Varl, the Unai, saw what the humans did and realized the impossible was possible. If the humans can fight, then so can we. For the first time in recorded history, a slave revolt rippled across an entire galactic sector simultaneously. The Vanduul fleets, expecting compliance, found their own ships turning into battlegrounds. Engines exploded. Control centers burned. Flesh pits became graveyards. For the slavers, the broken had become the storm. From the wreckage, humans recovered more than freedom. They took the enemy's ships. They took the enemy's weapons. They took the knowledge of how the Vanduul grew their fleets, and they corrupted it. The first human-grown bio-dreadnought was born in orbit over the shattered moon of Delta 9. Built from the bones of fallen Vanduul ships, powered by human ingenuity, and named after the chant that echoed across every prison, unbroken. When the Crucible of Silence detonated, the explosion wasn't just mass converted into energy. It was the ignition point for something the Vanduul had never truly understood. Something more terrifying than weapons, fleets, or armies. It was the will of humanity. From the ashes of the slave revolts, the first wave of the broken fleet was born. These were not the elegant, sleek dreadnoughts of humanity's past. These were monstrosities, part metal, part flesh, abominations grown from the twisted biomachinery of Vanduul ships, fused with Terran technology, rage, and creativity. Where the Vanduul grew armor from bone and sinew, humanity reinforced it with neutronium plating, scavenged singularity cores. Where the Vanduul used organic plasma sacs for weapons, humanity implanted railgun arrays, antimatter, lances, and gravity shear cannons directly into the flesh. Their ships bled when damaged, but bled molten metal, acidic compounds, and radioactive fluids. The first Terran bio-dreadnought, the TNS Unbroken, led the charge. A towering asymmetrical nightmare stitched together from 6 captured Vanduul cruisers, bristling with human-designed weapons that no other species would ever dare to create. The Vanduul, panicked. The Vanduul had never known fear. Their entire civilization was built on predation, on the assumption that prey would always run, always break. But now, the prey was hunting them. The first assault was on Hollow Spire, a Vanduul breeding world where thousands of humans had been processed for generations. The broken fleet didn't send demands, didn't open negotiations. They arrived in silence, deployed atmosphere disruptors that boiled oceans, launched kinetic rods that pierced the planet's crust, triggering supervolcanoes, deployed graviton inversion warheads, tearing entire mountain ranges into dust clouds that rained for days. This is not war, the broadcast echoed in every Vanduul frequency. This is correction. The cities of bone and sinew burned. Processing pits collapsed into molten scars. Entire genetic spires, the source of Vanduul reproduction, were glassed. When the fires cooled, nothing remained. The galaxy watches in horror and awe across the stars. Every species watched. The feeds. Pirate lords, mercenary kings, galactic empires. For centuries, the Vanduul were the nightmare at the edge of every star chart. Unstoppable, undefeated, unquestioned. Until humanity stood broken. And then humanity stood. The galaxy realized something horrifying. The Vanduul had made one critical error no predator should ever make. They taught humanity how they fight. And humanity learned. The burn campaign for every human world that fell, for every body broken, the broken fleet launched a reckoning. For Proxima Prime, they erased Hive Meridian, a Vanduul Fleet Command world, sending its core into a controlled collapse, turning the entire planet into a white dwarf. For Vega Station, they unleashed Project Nyx, a nanite storm that devoured a Vanduul shipyard the size of a small moon, leaving nothing but molecular dust. For every child stolen, they unleashed Shadow Doctrine, AI drone swarms designed to infiltrate Vanduul bio-networks and permanently corrupt their reproductive coding, ensuring entire castes of slavers would never be born again. You broke our bodies, but you'll never break humanity. The chant wasn't just words now. It was the call sign for every Terran vessel. It was etched into the hull of every broken fleet dreadnought. It was whispered in the radio. Static before every strike, the collapse of an empire by the third cycle of the Burn campaign. The unthinkable happened. The Vanduul Empire, undefeated for 10,000 years, fractured. Entire fleets rebelled against their own leadership, not to escape humanity, but to avoid extinction. Vanduul warlords fled to deep voids, abandoning their breeding worlds, their stations, their legacy. It didn't matter. There was nowhere to run. The broken fleet had learned the Vanduul's greatest secret, the location of their ancestral homeworld, Vandraxis Prime, a planet hidden in the gravitational shadows of a collapsed quasar. The fleet arrived not as liberators, not as diplomats, but as judgment for a full Terran day to 26 hours. Vandraxis Prime burned. Oceans boiled. Continents fractured. The crust split. The atmosphere vented into space. When the final kinetic strike fell, the planet shattered, its core exposed, molten, spinning in the void like the beating heart of a dead god. The final messaging, the aftermath, the Terran fleet left a single monument, floating where Vandraxis Prime used to be, a black obelisk inscribed with thousands of human names: Proxima, Vega, Europa, Triton, Earth. We remember. You broke our bodies, but you'll never break humanity. The monument pulses in the dark, a lighthouse of warning to every corner of the galaxy, the new law of the stars from that day forward. The galaxy understood something fundamental. It wasn't humanity's ships, or weapons, or technology that made them powerful. It was the fact that when everything was stripped away, when their bones were broken, when their homes were ashes, when their bodies were crushed, their will could not be shattered. Humanity does not fall. Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive. A child asks in a distant star system. Years later, an alien child tugs at their elder's robe, staring up at the stars. Grandparent, is it true? The humans were broken? The elder looks into the void where Vandraxis used to be, the scars still visible in the night sky. Yes, but that was their mistake. Because there is one truth about humanity the galaxy can never forget. You can break their bodies, but you will never break their spirit.